From folklore and fairies
to monsters and mysteries, it came from the Maritimes.
He wants to suck your blood. My co-host, Evan.
Eating lots of garlic so vampires don't bite her. My co-host, Chelsea.
Can anyone guess what the topic of our episode today is based on those sweet introductions?
Werewolves?
Evan, you're off the pod.
I'm sorry, guys.
I even wore my Dracula shirt for the occasion. I'm very into themed clothing for the recordings these days.
I mean, it does bring a certain charm to it.
It does. And it's the original Bela Lugosi's Dracula, so...
Classic.
Oh yes, it is a classic. Just like today's story. Hi everyone. Welcome to It Came From The Maritimes, a podcast sharing Atlantic Canada folklore. The story we're going to share today was brought to my attention by Doug at Haunts from the Cape, a paranormal investigation group in Cape Breton. I'd like to start by thanking him for sharing his story with me, which was included in Vernon Oickle's collection called Ghost Stories of Nova Scotia. Evan, had you ever heard of this story, The Vampire of Ingonish?
I hadn't, and I'm very curious because I know when I saw the Lunenburg werewolf, I'm kind of like, well, there's a werewolf story in Nova Scotia. There must be a vampire, but then I guess I just never searched it further.
Well, that's it. We've covered the Lunenburg werewolf, the Roby Street witch house, and now we're tackling vampires to add it to the mix of ghost stories and the stories of other ghouls we've covered.
Mm-hmm.
On the northeastern tip of Cape Breton is Ingonish, a town known for its beautiful beaches and trails, breathtaking views in the Cape Breton Highlands National Park, and its famous Celtic Lodge. The Celtic Lodge was first built by industrialist Henry Clay Corson in 1904 as a summer home. He originally built a log home on the property, hoping the fresh air in the surrounding area would help cure his sick wife. After the Cabot Trail opened in 1932, the area became a tourist destination, and the property was opened as a tourist lodge in 1941. After a wartime closure and rebuild, the current esteemed building opened in 1951. Guests and staff of the Celtic Lodge are no strangers to supernatural occurrences. People have reported feeling watched and even seeing a spectral figure, one that matches the description of the deceased previous owner, Henry Corson. Although spectral experiences had been had before, the staff at the Celtic Lodge and the people of the surrounding community of Ingonish had no idea what they would see in the summer of 1996. Evan, I know you've spent quite a bit of time in Cape Breton. Have you ever stayed at the Celtic Lodge?
Yeah, we have. Actually, when you go right past Celtic Lodge, there's a parking lot at the end, and there's the entrance to Middlehead Trail there. And it's a place that Allie and I've gone a couple of times, and it's a really great place for bird watching, hiking in general. If you go there at the right time of year, at the very end of it, you can see all the seagull chicks hatching, which they're really cute. You got to see them.
I can imagine. I'm a bad Nova Scotian. I've stayed in Bedeck twice, but I've never actually explored the Cabot Trail, so I'll need to add it to my list, including that hike.
The other thing I'll say, just with how you opened here, the lodge being a home for his sick wife, it gives me very, the yellow wallpaper?
Yes.
Going to a house by the sea to cure you, so it already gives me some paranormal feelings.
Right? Definitely sets a tone.
Yeah.
Now, in 1996, Doug Momberket, who I mentioned above, was working at the Celtic Lodge. Throughout that summer, he and his fellow staff members saw a mysterious stranger skulking through Ingonish on numerous occasions. These sightings always happened between midnight and sunrise. The first time Doug spotted this man, he had been moose spotting with a friend in the early hours of the morning, around 2 a.m. Doug and his friend were walking past the graveyard when they saw a mist creeping across the road and a strange man standing in the middle of it. The man was 6 feet tall and appeared to be in his late 40s. He was wearing an outdated black tuxedo, a long black cape with a red satin lining, a wide-brimmed top hat, and a gold pocket watch. Due to his gothic apparel and the late hour at which he was roaming around, they called him the Vampire of Ingonish. Evan, what would you do if you saw a mystery man standing in the mist at 2 a.m.?
I mean, I'm usually in bed by 10, so...
Just a non-issue.
Yeah, I'd say I probably wouldn't approach him. It is, I'm going to be honest, maybe just me, but I think in general, I don't think I've seen a person in all of Cape Breton wearing a tuxedo or anything that formal, but Ingonish, it's kind of a I don't think there's that much going on there that anyone would be wearing a tuxedo.
No, it's a bold look, formal attire.
I mean, I guess sometimes people get married at the lodge there, so that's all I can
very true.
imagine.
I could see like someone getting dolled up for that. But even then, rocking like a red satin lined cape and a wide brim top hat, it's not a look you see too often these days, but you never know.
That's a very deliberate choice.
It is. I like the way you phrased that, deliberate. Now, Doug and his friend, they kept this sighting between the two of them for a while. They were uncertain about what they had witnessed that dark and foggy night, and honestly, they just assumed it was, at most, someone who was a bit of a night owl with a gothic fashion sense. However, 2 weeks later, Doug's girlfriend reported a sighting of her own. She and a friend had been driving to Ingonish from Sydney late at night when they saw a strange man walking on the road towards the Celtic Lodge. They described his odd apparel, and it matched the description of who Doug had seen exactly. One stormy night later that summer, Doug and his girlfriend went behind the White Birch Inn at the Celtic Lodge to watch the waves that were stirred up by an approaching hurricane. They were watching these massive waves crash on the cliff for about 10 minutes when suddenly Doug's girlfriend gestured towards the cliff edge near the main building. The vampiric man was standing on a small ledge that would have been impossible to get to without rappelling down the cliff. Now, that would have been difficult on a normal day and downright impossible during the storm surge. Even with the rough winds whipping from the Atlantic Ocean, the man stood steady. Not even so much as his cape moved in the breeze. Doug yelled to the man, offering help, but the mysterious figure simply nodded, smiling before vanishing into thin air, just prior to a wave crashing on the very ledge he had been standing on. So I think what's so creepy is that his cape wasn't moving, because maybe like a man could have impeccable core strength and like stand still in the wind, but his clothes would be whipping around him. So that definitely lends to the thought that there's certainly something supernatural at play.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing as like clothes blow in the wind. Like that's just the reality of it, especially in a storm. So I don't even know how you can control that without some sort of magic.
Right? It's very interesting. Now, after the storm, Doug never saw the mysterious man again himself. He did share this tale on his Facebook page later, though. And through comments, he found out that others had seen this figure during the summer of 1996. One person even reported picking up the strange man near Cape Smoky, and at one point looked in his rearview mirror when the man had been silent and realized he had disappeared from the back seat.
Jeez, that's Now, did he actually disappear, or was he just invisible?
Well,
in the rearview mirror?
That's what we don't know. But it would be creepy. Not that I make a habit of picking up people from the side of the road anyway, but that story certainly doesn't motivate me to start.
No. I'll keep an eye out next time I'm near Cape Smoky.
You'll have to let me know if you see anyone matching the description.
Closest I saw was a bald eagle.
Vampires, bald eagles.
They fly. They kind of got like a... I think bald eagles look kind of formal. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Oh, man.
Allie, where are you? Do you agree with me, Allie?
I see what you mean.
Allie agrees with me completely.
I want it on the record that they are engaged, so we cannot trust.
I will also say that Allie didn't agree with me completely. Partially, but I'll take it.
That's another poll I'm going to create. Are bald eagles like vampires? Yes or no? People, stay tuned to the Instagram stories. We want to know. We want to hear from you.
Please agree with me. I need this win.
Please don't. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit more about vampire folklore in general. Myths of the vampire, or vampire, as I've heard it pronounced on documentaries. Thank you. They've existed for hundreds of years across many cultures. What I find so fascinating about all these stories, where there are these stories about mythical creatures, is that there's so many consistencies in the folklore surrounding vampires around the world. They are generally considered undead creatures who were once human, who feed on some sort of human essence for sustenance, whether it's blood or psychic energy. They are typically depicted as pale and ethereal and are only able to walk at night. Now, there are real medical conditions that can lead to vampiric tendencies. One is porphyria. It's a blood disorder that results in painful blisters on the skin when exposed to sunlight. Some symptoms of this condition can be alleviated with the consumption of blood. There's other diseases such as rabies that can cause aberrant behavior that could lead to actions that could make one be suspected of vampirism. Now, this is the only story of a vampire-type creature I've heard in Nova Scotia. That being said, if anyone has heard one themselves, please always let us know. We'd love to hear it. There have been accounts of other vampires within Canada, though. One story brings us to the Davis Strait between Baffin Island of Nunavut and Greenland. In 1832, a whaling vessel, the Shannon, collided with an iceberg and started to sink. Some of the sailors survived by clinging to the upright hull of the vessel and were suffering dehydration until they started drinking the blood of one of their dead colleagues. The survivors were called the Davis Strait vampires. Now, this one's just sad because these people didn't really have a choice. And also, can you imagine surviving such a harrowing event just to be remembered for this thing you had to do to survive?
There's a lot of similar stories that you hear, and it's kind of more of a sad tale than a paranormal one.
Yeah, it's not like they were seeking out the blood.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there is a tale with more paranormal tones that brings us to the Polish settlement in Wilno, Ontario, where the fear of vampires was deeply entrenched in the Kashubian people that settled in that area. Now, in their culture, they believed that babies born with a caul on their face or born with 2 teeth would become vampires. They'd live a full life, and once they died, they'd be reborn as an evil entity. Now, this entity didn't necessarily act like standard vampires do, just seeking out blood from whatever source they could. They would specifically only drain their relatives' blood, and they would make a point of stealing their children and then ringing the church bell to announce their evil accomplishment in a way of mocking the family that they had just murdered.
Jeez.
Right? It's pretty grim stuff.
Yeah, no kidding.
Now, they did come up with ways to essentially defeat these vampires, either before they became one or after. So someone born with a caul would be secretly fed their powdered caul at age 7, and that would save them from ever turning into a vampire. But someone born with 2 teeth would inevitably become a vampire, so certain measures had to be taken against them to ensure they wouldn't raise as the undead. Now, I found that the superstitious methods to prevent them from rising as a vampire had very Maritime vibes. So 1, they would fill the coffin with sand because, according to their folklore, it would take the vampire as many years to rise as there were grains of sand in the coffin. So the more sand you could fit in, the longer you were protected. Another technique was they would cover the corpse of the would-be vampire with a fishing net because it would take the vampire as many years to rise as there were knots in the net. If these precautions were either not taken, or if someone couldn't remember if they had done it effectively enough, the townsfolk would exhume the corpse of a suspected future vampire and cut off its head and flip the corpse upside down. So if it did somehow survive being decapitated, it would dig into the ground instead of digging out of the earth. Mm-hmm. There are town records that show this drastic measure was taken at least once.
Oh, wow.
Pretty grisly, isn't it?
I find this interesting, partially because our folklore tip last time was if a child is born with 2 back teeth, that they're going to be a poet. But I guess maybe it's specifically talking about canine teeth.
Not in this town.
The other thing I'll say is kids born with teeth, they're often known as neonatal teeth. They might not be vampires necessarily, but if they're breastfed, their moms might think so. I don't know about the vampire issue.
That is so funny. I do find it interesting that it's consistently like a lot of the folklore is like if a baby's born with 2 teeth, something's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Specifically 2.
Yeah.
But I imagine, I would think that they're thinking more of like canine teeth.
Yeah, that look like fangs.
Yeah.
Whereas I guess, the poet one was the back teeth, but still, it's interesting the consistency.
Yeah.
I want it on the record. I'm sitting here looking at Evan as he tries to make his canine teeth look like little fangs. I wish this was a video podcast so you could all join me. Now, luckily, as far as we know, the Vampire of Ingonish didn't take any human lives during his time in Cape Breton. Was he passing through Ingonish in the summer of 1996, attracted to the area by the storm that plagued it that season, providing extra hours of darkness? Or is he still there, lurking in an unknown spot, simply unseen for the time being?
I guess we don't know.
All right, so for today's segment, we're going to be introducing It Came From The Maritimers, which is where we share listener ghost stories. We'd like to thank Megan from Kings County for writing in with a personal experience. Here's the story. So when I was a child, I woke up one night, probably around 2 or 3 a.m., and I saw a figure standing by my bed in the moonlight. I remember him vividly to this day, and it's been at least 15 years. He was a young man, probably mid to late teens, with dark hair, quite lanky, and wearing clothes that looked to be from the 1920s or 30s. I had told my family at the time, and everyone brushed it off as a dream. Years later, my younger sister, who was an infant at the time I saw him, Saw the same figure. We have a 9-year age difference, and it was 9 years after I had seen him that she did. I don't remember the exact date I saw him, but how interesting would it have been if we were exactly the same age at the time of seeing him ourselves. She and I were talking one day, and she told me about seeing this figure. So we started swapping back and forth, asking if he had particular characteristics to verify that we had seen the same figure. It was very spooky at the time, but now we affectionately refer to him as Billy. I'm not sure if anyone died on or near the property, as our house was built more recently in 1979 than he would have been around. I hope you enjoyed this story. I enjoy listening to the podcast. Keep it up. Thanks. So what do you think, Evan?
That's interesting, especially where it seems to be like when they were the same age that they saw Billy.
Right? I find that so fascinating because I know we have a younger cousin who saw kind of a spirit around that age, or at least was like kind of sleep talking to one when I babysat them. So it's interesting that certain spirits seem to present to infants.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing that story, Megan. And if anyone else has a story of their own, then please send us an email. We'd love to hear it. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of It Came From The Maritimes. You can find us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at It Came From The Maritimes, on X at ICFT Maritimes. If you have any Atlantic Canada folklore you'd like to see covered in future episodes, or any spooky encounters of your own, email us at itcamefromthemaritimes@gmail.com. If you enjoy our podcast, please leave us a 5-star review, rating. It really helps people find our podcast. We want to end each episode by sharing a piece of Nova Scotia folklore advice that we found in our reading. Please don't take it seriously at any point. It's just a bit of fun. Evan, do you have a folklore tip for us?
Yeah, if your right hand itches, you will meet a stranger. I wonder if Doug ever had a itchy hand.
I know, I'm curious as well.